can you describe the Catholic imagination to someone perhaps unfamiliar with the term? And then what makes it distinct from other spiritual or creative worldviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. As Catholics, sometimes since we can't get outside of ourselves and we can't get outside of our own tradition, we don't realize the degree to which we are imprinted by a Catholic formation. But when you do kind of take a step outside and think about what we have in common as a result of a Catholic formation, and some of this is generational. I have three sons. Their formation was different than mine was, years ago, but nonetheless, there are certain things that still hold true. We have a common language. We're 7 years old when we learn words like transubstantiation and concepts like
Hmm.
transubstantiation. We learn about mortal and venial sin. We learn about another aspect of the Catholic formation is children are exposed to the reality of death very early. We go to church and there's a cross and there's a body on the cross, and it's not something to shy away from. It's a reality of life that young children are not protected from in the way that many American children are. Um,
Hmm.
there's a sense of mortality that we get from a very early age, and trying to see your life not just what's going to happen here, but what happens beyond, because this is not all there is. So Catholics have this long view of, how do we fit into the universe and into eternity, rather than thinking, as a lot of secular Americans do, well, this is it and there's nothing after this. Um, then we also have this amazing repository of stories that we grow up listening to, week after week, or if you go to daily mass day after day, you hear these Bible stories that are just we're imprinted with, and they're so deep within us, and they're such goads to the imagination. Jesus' parables are just so rich and full of possibility, and we've heard hundreds and thousands of homilies over our lifetime as to how do we read these passages. And then, of course, as a little kid, I remember sitting, in church and not, having a clue as to what they were talking about, and you're looking around and like, oh, there are these beautiful stained glass windows in which Bible stories are being acted out. And then there are statues of the saints up there that you learn about and you have affection for. I come from an Italian American family, and we were all about Saint Anthony. Like, Saint Anthony was the go-to saint, and Mary. So, our formation is very much based around this imagery, these stories, this language. The music, of course, that we grew up with also was very important. I still remember those songs. Nobody sings them anymore, but I still remember those songs that I sang standing next to my mom when I was a little girl, that informed my own sense come Holy Ghost, Creator blessed. Like, of course, we always sang that on Pentecost, and I still think of that song on Pentecost, even though no one sings it anymore, or very few people do anyway. So it gives us this gift of music as well. All of this, by the way, is art. Interestingly, goading the imagination, provoking us into imagining God. Because let's face it, we can't see God, we can't taste, touch, feel God. The closest we can come is these artistic representations, these stories, this language that has been given to us. So when a Catholic, I mean, I think as Catholics, like, we just have this incredibly rich inheritance. And so as a Catholic artist, then you have that to draw on. And you may not even realize that you're drawing on it, when you're writing poetry or when you're storytelling, because it's just so much a part of your vocabulary and so much a part of your history. And so the Catholic imagination emerges in writers and in artists without them trying. As Flannery O'Connor says, we bring our whole self, our whole person into play when we create something. And good luck trying to screen that out. It's just so deeply embedded in us that we really can't. So the Catholic imagination then manifests itself. I'm really interested to see the ways in which it manifests itself in people who are conscious of it. There are plenty of writers. We were just talking about the great Murray Bodo. Obviously, he's very conscious of his Catholic imagination, but then there are writers who may not be, but it's still very much a part of who they are. So I'll use a very popular example that I like to use with my students is Bruce Springsteen, um, who grew up in Freehold, New Jersey. He went to Catholic school. Our St. Rose of Lima Church was his church. They called it Lima. He was an altar boy. He went to Catholic school. He was not a good kid. misbehaved very badly. He got thrown off the altar boys. Nonetheless, he was imprinted by this experience of growing up in the Catholic Church, of being at all the weddings and all the funerals, and understanding this kind of liturgical life that his whole family and his whole town really was invested in. And for a long time, he didn't acknowledge that. But in recent years, he wrote a memoir a few years ago called Born to Run, in which he talks about like it was really my first experience of beauty. It was a dark beauty. This is pre-Vatican II Catholicism, right? It was a dark beauty. It was a mystery I didn't understand. And that's somehow
Mm,
at the core of me as an artist. And then when you take a look at Springsteen's lyrics, I mean, his favorite word, I think, is redemption. There's
mm,
not one song that he writes that is not in some way about redemption. He writes about sin. He writes about loss. He writes about this search for something beyond himself that sometimes can't get named. His songs are songs, often anthems of social justice, which are very much in keeping, especially with my younger students. That's their passion. Um, it's again, he's not conscious of it, but that's part of who he is because of that Catholic formation that he had. So I think once we start looking in our culture, we see that there's a lot of the Catholic imagination there. We just may not recognize it until know what to look for. The other things that I think makes a Catholic person with a Catholic imagination is there really is this need to look into the darkness. You know, I mentioned earlier this early um, familiarity that we develop with death as if we're, raised Catholic. Um, and it's something that if you're going to do what Flannery tells us we have to do and live hotly in pursuit of the real, that's hotly in pursuit of the darkness. And so a lot of Catholic writers, I keep using Flannery as an example, so I'll just mention her stories. There are some people who find her stories they're very, very troubling, because terrible things happen in them. You know, serial killers show up. Um, People have all sorts of painful disabilities. People get, there are murders. People get attacked. Things get stolen. I mean, they're just all of these stories about pain and suffering. And again, O'Connor, first of all, she was writing about the world she knew. She's writing about the South and, the 50s and the 60s. A lot of the stories she writes, she actually would read the newspaper and find, like, oh, that happened. I'm going to now, put this into a story. And O'Connor's way of thinking about darkness and violence was that it was everybody's in need of grace. We're all in need of grace. We're all in need of forgiveness. But most of us are not willing to recognize that it's being offered to us, and we don't think we need it because we think we're all right by ourselves, right? And so all of her characters, as she said, their heads are so hard that it's got to be something really shocking to get through to them. So she uses violence as a means to wake her characters up to the reality of their life, and their
mm.
need for grace. And but some readers really have a hard time with her because she does take you to dark places in the stories. And she also has a wicked sense of humor. So interwoven in these almost tragic, seemingly tragic stories is this like very, very wry Southern humor. So yeah, I think that there is this quality in a lot of Catholic writers, of needing to look into the darkness. How do we make it bearable? How do we, and one way to make it bearable is to write a song with a sound that people are going to find compelling because they'll listen
Hmm.
to the song and then, oh, what's going on in this song? Or they'll be sucked into the story by the humor in the first few paragraphs and the quirkiness of these people, and then, oh my gosh, like, where is it that we've been taken to? And I don't think it's a sleight of hand. I think it's a sense of a worldview in which all of these things are of a piece. Yeah, I mean, the greatest artists to do this, Shakespeare. Shakespeare's, tragedies are full of humor, and his comedies are full of tragedy, because that's life.
Yeah, yeah. You said something earlier that I'd never thought about before, but because I grew up Catholic, and I don't think I've ever really thought about how the art and the reverence of the Mass, and then, like you said, the crucifix there, front and center. you know, I mean, I don't think I've ever thought about how this real confrontation with mortality at a young age has shaped my life as an artist. That is very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a Speaking of the Catholic imagination and like people who theorize about it, there's a theologian whose name is David Tracy, and he talks about these kind of two poles of ways of being in the world. There's the analogical imagination, and then there's the dialectical imagination. And the analogical imagination is the Catholic imagination or the sacramental imagination. And that's the imagination that sees meaning in everything, that sees God inhering in the world, all around us, in each other, the Imago Dei. And there's this trust in the imagination, right? There's this trust that God is there. As the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins writes, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. So there's this absolute conviction, God in all things. And then there's the dialectical side, which is associated with Protestantism, which is a distrust
Hmm.
of imagination, and also a distrust of things, a distrust of statues and like, do you worship Mary? Of scapulars and rosaries and all of these things. And so it's a kind of foreign way to thinking, I think, to a Catholic to think that way, but also I think to a Protestant, a Catholic way of thinking is definitely. Um, in fact, I'd love to read you a little paragraph from this book that I teach all the time by Andrew Greeley.
Yeah,
Catholic.
please. That'd be great. Yeah.
It's
Sorry, say the book again.
it's called The
What's
Catholic
this from?
Imagination. And it's by Andrew Greeley, who was a lovely man. He was a priest, a sociologist at the University of Chicago for many years, and also a novelist. Um, but this book is it's a lovely exploration of the ways of the enchanted imagination, the ways in which Catholics see the world. But I really just love the opening paragraph where he says, Catholics live in an enchanted world, a world of statues and holy water, stained glass and votive candles, saints and religious medals, rosary beads and holy pictures. But these Catholic paraphernalia are mere hints of a deeper and more pervasive religious sensibility, which inclines Catholics to see the holy lurking in creation. As Catholics, we find our houses and our world haunted by a sense that the objects, events, and persons of daily life are revelations of grace. And I just think this is such a succinct and beautiful description of the analogical imagination, the sacramental imagination, the Catholic imagination.